So Dead Man's Wire is the latest film from Gus Van Sant, which is based on the true story of Tony, this guy who went into a bank in the late 1970s with a shotgun and held one of the mortgage lenders at at gunpoint and forced everybody to witness him get an apology for being screwed over by the bank. Now, the thing is, with this type of material, I feel like it would be so easy to get lost in the style of it all, where you become more obsessed with trying to recapture the 1970s setting. And that was my initial fear going into this film, because before I watched the film, I looked up what inspired him to make this film, and he was listening to some of the old audio recordings. When he was listening to it, he was inspired. He's just like, wow, the way this guy talks, the way that he was able to maintain his demands and his cool while he had a shotgun to this guy's neck. Just man, I gotta make a film about this guy. And I thought, okay, that's I'm glad that he has some inspiration. But then as the film starts up, you can tell it does have this very distinct style where they favor kind of retro style news footage, where Van Sant is really trying to recapture that style of old 70s news footage, while also embracing the 70s music by having a radio DJ thrown into the mix, and then also showcasing some black and white photos to make it seem a little bit more real and in the moment with that photography added in. And I thought, okay, is he gonna get lost here? Is he just gonna favor a lot of the style and then just kind of blow off the story here? And thankfully he doesn't. I think Van Sant actually does a really good job maintaining a focus on what drove Tony to this point, and how he affected the entire world around him by trying to capture the media's attention in this moment, and just never lose sight of the character and the themes. But I think what really helps establish this film and make you care about it so much is Bill Skarsgård's performance as Tony, just melting into the role of this guy who comes in, just looking a little bit desperate with a mustache, and just he's desperate, but you can also sense a calculative nature within him, that he kind of knows what he's doing, because he doesn't just come into the office of Richard Hall with the shotgun and just point it to his neck. He actually rigs it up with a wire so that if Richard even moves a little bit or too far out, the shotgun will go off and blow his head off. So he's thought about this a bit, and even the initial moment where he catches Richard off guard is when he comes in there and he's got this big box, and it looks like the perfect box to hold a weapon in, and it pretty much is. But at first, when you put it down, he pulls out what Richard thinks are blueprints. Oh, look at these, and then he unravels the blueprints, and it's for the shotgun. And then sure enough, out comes the shotgun, and here we go. Richard, I'm taking you hostage, and here's how this is all going to go down. Not to mention, Richard has pretty good performance here by Darcy Montgomery, who was I was actually surprised with how shocked and just desperate Richard becomes here. He doesn't become truly pathetic, but he's very honest with someone like Tony, because you can sense that Tony is a guy you can reason with. He's not at the edge of his rope. He's not screaming all that much. He's not shooting wildly into the air. He's just look, here's what's going to happen. You're going to do it, or something bad is going to happen. Which is kind of surprising for this type of character who's mostly just, trying to get back at a mortgage company, for kind of screwing him over out of his real estate deals. And it surprisingly works. It's surprisingly tense and thoughtful and very, very offbeat at times. And I think the other cool thing too is how Van Sant is able to kind of drift away from Tony a little bit so that he can focus on a few more interesting characters in the mix here. For one, the most interesting character outside of him is the DJ of Fred Temple here, played by Coleman Domingo, which, oh man, if you love listening to Coleman Domingo, where he's got, that smooth, sexy voice, there's a lot of that here, especially when he gets on the radio and starts speaking a lot more like a philosopher. And he kind of becomes like the man that Tony gravitates towards. We're just like, yeah, this guy knows what he's talking about. I want this guy in on the mix. And sure enough, he does. And and Fred's just kind of like, yeah, I can't turn away from this. Not to mention, you do explore like a few other characters, like there's some reporters trying to get a good story. There's the FBI trying to figure out a way to take out Tony and not cave to all of his demands. And then in a bit of a small role, but I think a role that works fairly well, you have Al Pacino as Richard's father of ML Hall, who basically won't negotiate with terrorists. He hears Tony, but he won't listen to him. So there's arrogance in him. He's not even present in the same city for this for this story, which of course further complicates issues and makes Tony frustrated. And then of course you do have detectives in on the mix who are trying to find a way to de-escalate here, and especially I really liked Cary Elwes' performance as Detective Michael Grable, who's just, you know, he is a little bit more like frustrated. He does feel kind of like the typical furious 1970s cop, but he wears that role well. I think he does fairly well in that position here. I always kind of love it when directors try out crime thrillers, whether that's their preferred genre or not, because within these types of, you know, stories, be they like capers or hostage situations, you can really see just how much control a director has over trying to stage the tension here. And I love how Van Sant just kind of like blows up the entire story to focus on a bunch of different characters instead of just Tony, while still making it just about him. And just the calculative nature of both Tony and the way that Gus Van Sant directs the film never loses sight of anything. Like at one point, I especially love the editing, not just for how it cuts between news footage and photography, but at one point there's a scene where Tony is demanding that the hostage situation be put on television and interrupt the Oscars, where John Wayne is giving a speech. And he's just like, God, I hate John Wayne. Just like get me on the television. And while he is bringing out Richard with a shotgun to his head, and the news footage is about to interrupt the Oscars, we get quick cuts to John Wayne, and then scenes from his violent westerns, and then back to Tony, and then back to John Wayne, and then back to like the violence of westerns, and it's edited in this very lyrical way where you get it, and it doesn't feel too overbearing. Like you're seeing the media's obsession with violence and how Tony is more or less just trying to control an apparatus rather than just slather blood all over the airwaves, because blood, as it turns out, is kind of preferred. Like they do cut to some reporters at one point, or just like, what happens if Tony blows this guy's brains out on television? They're just like, we'll pay the fee and cut to a commercial. So it's just the obsession with violence and the corruption within within the banking system, and the need for Tony to just expose it and demand an apology and not be treated like a criminal for just being, you know, for just, you know, having someone say they're sorry, really makes you root for Tony by the end of this. And like, and that's the thing, I feel like some other director might look at this material and kind of treat it as like, you know, a tricky situation where you kind of see Richard's point of view and you kind of identify with his father, and you don't here. Like you do not feel that bad for them. Considering everything that Tony goes through, even for like some of the wild stuff they try out here. Like at one point, there's a nightmare sequence with Richard, which is just like it's bizarre and it's violent and it frightens him. But you kind of want it to frighten him. You do want it to frighten him, though. You do want him to feel like, yeah, this guy might kill you if you're not taking him seriously, if you're just shoving everyone under the rug with these underhanded mortgage tactics that, you know, that you don't have to think about them, and now you do, and it's terrifying. And then you have an era appropriate soundtrack, which, you know, the needle drops here I think work fairly well, especially when you have like Coleman Domingo's voice coming in here and there. It was always so much fun whenever he was on screen. Maya La as Linda Page as one of the reporters. I really liked her her tenacity to kind of like get just the right story and try to find witnesses and try to navigate her way around the other news teams and the law enforcement to try to get the best story she can. You kind of identify with her a little bit, but at the same time recognize what she's adding to the media ecosystem here. And it's kind of like one of those things where you just feel like she's a player caught up in the game and she's just doing the best that she can, and you kind of want to sympathize with her. And I think you can sympathize with her a lot more than you can with like Richard or Michael. You do feel like there's more of a drive for her to persevere, not just because, you know, a black woman trying to establish herself in a reporting world, but also just trying to cover a story in more detail. I think a fascinating test would be to see if you would try showing this film to somebody and don't tell them that it's based on a true story, and see if they can guess or not. Now, you won't have to tell them by the end, because when they get to the end of the film, they do reveal a textual epilogue, and then they do actually show you the footage of when Tony and Richard were in front of a news conference with the shotgun still to his neck. And you see the way he talks, and you're just like, wow, yeah, that's actually how he spoke. He spoke with this very commanding nature, and almost in kind of like a weirdly chummy way, where he's just like, okay, yeah, I am getting what I want. I still got the shotgun, but I'm cool. I'm cool with all you guys as long as, you know, we get this paper signed, and, you know, I get an apology. That's all I want out of this. So yeah, just fantastic performances all around. Just great thrilling tension. I do feel it kind of lingers a little bit too long here and there with some of like the passages between Tony and Richard. I feel like those could have been a little bit shorter or a little bit punchier, because the rest of the film always feels like it's trying out a lot of different angles here. And once it gets to like Tony and Richard just kind of like discussing their situation, it kind of becomes a little bit too simplistic with like the class divide type of dialogue here. But thankfully it does get back on track pretty quickly once it's got to like transition to the next scene or keep the developments going. So I think Gus Van Sant's direction here is mostly tight in that regard, that there was never a moment where I was truly bored with the film. There were a few moments where I wish the dialogue were a little bit better in some of the longer monologues, but for the most part, between all the different characters and the cutting and just the fantastic performances, I think Gus Van Sant really made this work. So yeah, I enjoyed the hell out of Dead Man's Wire.